Hi, everybody. Doesn't look like it's working. Yeah. Okay. 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 Technology. Tech is not working. Oh, it is working. Hi, Eileen. Thank you so much for letting me know. For some reason, I couldn't see it on my side. So you're on Facebook. Are you on my business page or my personal page? And thanks for not leaving me out here going, oh, there's a new, I'm using a new streaming service. And so I've tried business page. Okay, great. I've tried, to practice and do it on my own, but it's very different than doing it live. So you'll excuse me if I'm kind of fumbling a little bit um, on all of this. So Eileen's here. I don't know if anybody else is here. We'll just give it a few more minutes. They aren't in sync. Oh God. Okay. Well, it's coming from a service called StreamYard, which is streaming at the same time, so I could to both platforms. So I can see that it might not always work perfectly in sync. So, well, I'm just going to go ahead and get started. And then, as people come in, feel free to ask questions as I'm going. I'll probably talk a little bit and then check comments and go back and forth and answer questions. I'm Randy Rossman. I'm owner of Canine Behavior Science in the Seattle, Washington area. And I'm a dog behavior consultant certified in dog behavior by two industry organizations, both CCPTT as a CBCC and IAABC. I wanted to talk about reactivity. By the way, this is going to be a regular series. I'm at first going to be doing these live streams both on YouTube and Facebook every other week. And if it kind of works out, then I might do it a little bit more often. But for right now, it'll be every other week. I wanted to start with reactivity because, it's spring, it's getting better out. And then just in general, more people are vaccinated now and more people are out and about. And that usually means time for reactivity in dogs to, escalate. In the winter, it's a little bit easier sometimes to get away from things. I just wanted to be clear, the audience for this is people who are are new, that have a new reactive dog. They may have gotten the dog during the pandemic, and now that they're going out and about, the dog is reacting on, reacting on walks, and they don't know what to do. Pet owners who have tried and have been working for a number of years and either hit a plateau and couldn't get beyond that, or they just haven't had much success and they've been working it for a long time. And that hitting a plateau is a fairly common thing. As you work, it gets a little bit better, and then you can't get much further anymore. And also trainers and other dog professionals that might be thinking, I can maybe do a little bit better, which is when I started doing okay with reactivity, but feeling that I could be doing better. My success rate could be better. It could be easier for clients to understand. So that's the audience. The audience isn't people who work differently than I do and want to debate it here. If you want to debate, we can discuss that somewhere else, but any sort of debate is going to take away from that original audience. So I just wanted to start with that because this is social media, and sometimes you get a lot of people that just want to come up and argue on different things, and I'm just not interested in doing that in this arena because it's going to take away from the people who I'm trying to help with that. So what I'm going to talk about here is, first I'm going to talk about typical problems I see. It's very often because of the nature of the client base that I have, which is people who have, that have dogs, people with dogs with moderate to severe behavior problems. So I often see people that have been working the problem for a while and then they're coming to me. And so I get a lot of insight into some of the typical problems of where people are having that. Sorry, I'm just not talking well today. I'm having trouble finding my words. But people who have hit, like I said, plateaus, or they're not having success. So I see a lot of those people, and I've been able to assess based on the assessments that I've done with them where some of the problems have fallen, and plus some of the challenges that I have when working with somebody to try to get them to the point where they can meet their goals with their dogs. So one of the first things is not understanding, whoops, let me do something here. So the first thing is not understanding your dog's precursor body language that indicates that something may happen soon. So we all know what a dog looks like when they're in reaction, and that's really hard to miss. But if we wait until that moment, the dog is gone. Or if we wait until they're just ramping up and they're about to bark and lunge, again, it's going to be really hard to do anything with the dog at that point in time. They're, in a nutshell, they're in fight or flight, which is both a physiological and a behavioral response. So there's not much you can do. The dog is already focused on the thing and what they want to do with the thing. So it's not your dog being bad. It's not that you are not doing the right thing in that moment. It's just the nature of the situation. They're not going to be interested. Chances are, once you're in that sort of moment, everything's focused towards the thing you're fighting or flighting, and nothing else is going to compete with that. No food, no anything else is going to compete with that. So understanding those really early precursor body language is really important. The next thing is related to the precursor body language, and it's waiting until the dog is pretty aroused before they start to try to use whatever procedure they're using. So this is across the board. For many of us, we see the dog as reacting or not reacting. And so if they're not barking, growling, lunging, if they're not in that mode, or they're not really stuck, where they just are staring and they can't get away from the thing that they're staring at, we don't really realize that the dog is really starting to get ramped up at some point. So the point that I want to be at, and Eileen Anderson's on here, and she's done a great webinar at one point on the different types of thresholds. The type of threshold that I want to start to work with a dog when they're out and about is the threshold where they're aware of the trigger, but they're not yet aroused. And that's very subtle and can be sometimes very difficult to try to find that spot. So the next thing is something that I don't hear about too often. It's that the situation is more complex than just on-leash reactivity. That on-leash reactivity is one symptom in a slew of symptoms, and that there are other things that have to be dealt with, because otherwise you're taking one step forward and two steps back with the reactivity. So for example, one of the common things that I see is that dogs have more general anxiety. It's not that they're fine out and about and then they see the trigger and they react. That's more, I call it simple reactivity. That's not a technical term, that's a Randy term. But a general anxiety, that's the dog immediately is anxious as soon as they're leaving the house. And so they're starting off in this really aroused stage. And there's a lot of things that may be happening in the environment besides the trigger. And we're just working on the trigger, the dogs, the people, things like that. But they're always up here with the anxiety. And so it's very hard if you're just working on this one piece. And the thing is that you still probably will be using the same sorts of things and tools and procedures for that actual reactivity, but you need to also address some of these other things as well. Otherwise, you're going to, excuse me, that's my dog Danny, who's now upset. Come here. He gets very upset when I talk to the screen. We're working on this. Hey, buddy. Come here. What you doing? What you doing? There we go. So he'll settle down. Oh, I see what's happening. Here you go. What happened was he lost his bully stick behind my other dog, and that was him telling me that he could not get to his bully stick. But anyway, there are a lot of times there's a lot more going on, and if you're just working on one thing, then you're going to have some challenges because the other things are still going on and impacting that one behavior, and so you can't make progress. So like I said, there may be other things that we do in addition to the, trigger type of work, or potentially talking to a vet or a veterinary behaviorist if there's general anxiety about medication. There's a whole slew of other things that can be brought in to help and be able to go towards your goals. But it's not going to work if you're just working on one thing. The next thing is allowing your dog to react often. And for some people, this is really challenging because of the environment they live in. But you want to, one of the principles of behavior is that the behavior being practiced is maintained or reinforced in some way. And so every single time your dog reacts, the behavior becomes stronger because they're getting that reinforcement or maintenance. Whether you understand what that reinforcer is or not, that is happening. Otherwise, the behavior wouldn't happen, which means that so it just means you can do perfect training setups. And this is something I hear a lot. Like we do great when we're doing a training setup. We do great in a class, but we can't get it done in the real world sort of environment. And that's because you're working at odds. The dog is reacting a lot when you're not training. And then when you're training, you're managing the environment. The dog actually can figure out that now we're in a training environment and I behave this way. Now I'm in an outside environment and this is what happens. So based on the science of behavior, that can be that the dog just actually, has a different sort of, they're reacting to the environment in a different way. So I understand how difficult that can be for some people that live in the city, that live in apartment buildings. It's easy if you live in a house with a big yard. You can even avoid walks for a while. But there's some things that can be done, to reduce walks, or done to make it so that you can have separate kind of walks, walks that are, now we're going to focus and practice this good, this work where you're not going to react. And then a separate kind of walk. Again, it's a different environment where you're, we can't control anything. So this is what life is going to be like. So there's a whole bunch of different things. If you're in a situation where you can't avoid the reactions, that you can try to do, that we can work on and that we can try to do to still get those reactions down. I always talk about trying to get reactions to zero, and that is in real life, that's really impossible to do. But if that's your goal, you might overshoot what you might be able to do otherwise. But that is going to create a negative impact on the work that you're doing. The next is not using reinforcers that are high value enough. In my training with reactivity, I do use food And the food needs to be awesome. It needs to be the kind of treat that the dog, if you're in a non distracting environment like your kitchen and there's nothing going on, you want it to be something when you pull it out, they start drooling immediately. So that's what's important, because you have a very strong competing reinforcer when they're looking at the trigger. Now, I've even worked with, I have forgotten to do, again, like I said, I am new to this, and I forgot to do these little titles at the bottom as I went through. So I'm, like I said, this is the first time I'm doing it, so hopefully I'm not screwing up the technology too much. But I've even worked with people like the first time we're working in a park environment or something like that, where I meet them and the dog is just not behaving the way I thought they would based on the previous training exercises. And so one of the first things I usually check is, what kind of reinforcers do you have? What kind of treats do you have? And usually it's not a very high value treat. So I give them treats that I bring that are high value, and bam, complete change in behavior, everything's going well. And then suddenly the behavior falls off again. And, I ask, did you run out of my treats? And yes. And so they started using other treats. The kind of treats and the value of the treats really matter in something like this. And so you want something that not only works when you're at home, but is just amazing. And they may be kind of gross, stinky things. Like I use these little sardines that are, they're really gross and they're sticky and they smell, but dogs love them. And it works. So in that environment. So you might be able to pull back once your dog is doing really well and start to lower the value of reinforcer. But at first, when you're working and you're trying to teach your dog a different behavior than the barking and lunging, you really need something that's very high value. The next thing is that the alternative behavior is not strong, proved, or generalized. And I have to admit, I did this a lot when I first started working with reactive dogs. Is we would do a little bit of, here's the alternative behavior, and then we'd almost immediately, within sometimes in the same session, go start to use it and practice it in the real world. And that is not going to work. The behavior is kind of like a kindergarten behavior, and the alternative behavior, being used instead of the behavior that you don't want, is like a PhD level behavior. So I work on, what I think is important is you really work on that alternative behavior in first starting off, just like any other behavior, first starting off in a non-distracted environment, and then you start proofing it by adding in distractions. Then you start generalizing it by working it in the backyard, in the front yard. Just depends on your dog and how well they generalize. Some dogs have to go front porch, front yard, driveway, 3 feet in front of the driveway. But you want to be able to get and make sure that behavior is really strong and fluid before you start using it in the environment where the behavior is happening. And so as humans, we want to go from point A to point Z really fast, but the dog often does not have the behaviors strong enough. So those are the typical problems that I see. So I'm just going to go to comments. I see there's some. Oh, thanks, Eileen. Oh, God. Sorry, I've got all the dogs down at my feet right now. They're like, pay attention to me. So, hey, buddy, come here. Let's see. Did he steal your bully stick again? Let me see. Did you steal his bully stick? Here you go, bud. Life in Zoom with 3 dogs that are all doing their own thing while I'm doing the live. This is something that hopefully you're going to see this. I'm working on it, and hopefully you'll see it get better and better. But he's only 18 months old, the one that you hear barking, and he was only 6 months old when we went into lockdown, and we're starting to work on hopefully going into the real world and dealing with some of these, demand behaviors. Anyway, so back to this. Now I've got him quiet. Next, what I want to do is talk about briefly how I approach what I call, the simple leash reactivity. And what I mean by that is that it doesn't have those extra complications involved. So it's that the dog has a real clear trigger. The dog is fine when they're out on a walk until they see the trigger. So it's not that the dog is really anxious the entire time. And it's not that the dog is triggered by everything, because there's some dogs that everything triggers them. The air, the birds, just everything triggers them. And so it's very hard to get to a space where you're keeping the dog from reacting if they're being triggered by everything. Usually there's something underlying that as well. That's what I call like simple reactivity. There's a reasonable distance. It's not that, they see anything, even a dot in the distance, start to move and then react. Again, like I said, we would probably still work with these same things, but these types of procedures alone wouldn't work. And so that's why a really good assessment is really important up front. If you think that if you've been having trouble over and over again, or you've hit a plateau and you can't go any further, you're trying a lot of different procedures and it's not working, then what you probably want to do is get a really good behavior assessment by a veterinary behaviorist or come here, come on, what you doing? By a veterinary behaviorist or a behavior consultant to understand if there's other things that might be interfering. Okay, that's really annoying. What you doing? Why are you doing that? There you go. I know you're upset that she has the bully stick and you don't. Okay, so sorry. Hopefully everybody out there understands, since you're all dog people, that I'm trying to keep the dog happy. Anyway, so I'm going to go through now how I work. The first thing is learning what your dog looks like when they notice something new in the environment. And that's not they're aroused or they're bothered by something in the environment. That's if there's something actually new in the environment, whether it's something they like or they don't like. And because that's the point where we want to start working and not let them get any further in the arousal cycle. So it could be as simple as their ear starts to move back. It's like they hear something. Some dogs sniff. Some dogs wrinkle their front foreheads. Hi, buddy. Here you go. Some dogs wrinkle their front foreheads. So you really want to be able to, okay, enough. You really want to be able to focus on, sorry guys, you really want, you're not making a very good impression. Buddy, what's the matter? Good boy. Did you want to come up here? So, so sorry, I lost track. I'm losing people. I can see people are starting to move away because they're getting tired of listening to the dog bark. And I'm sorry, I'm working on that right now with him. And I'm going to be doing some videos on working with that as well. So here's the little noisy guy. Anyway, so what you want to do is Okay, let's go down. So what you want to do is find out that thing that the dog is doing when they start to react. So that's important. So then the next thing that's typical with people like trainers that don't use aversives, we want to stop putting the dog into situations where they can practice these behaviors. And like I said, this is easy for some and very challenging for others, but I found the people that were able to manage the environment the best were the people that were most successful. The other thing is what I do is retrain leash walking, and I do that for a few reasons. One of the things I noted over the years of working with reactive dogs is that even if the person said, yeah, my dog is good on leash, he doesn't pull unless he sees something that he reacts to, is that the dog is lost in the environment the entire time they're on walks. And if the dog is never paying attention to you and you're just a thing at the end of the leash and they're just completely enraptured into the world, then it becomes really challenging to be able to turn around and ask for something from the dog if they're not paying attention to you. So what I like to work on, and it's two things at one time, it's teaching the dog to check in and reorient to you and leash walking at the same time. So the dog is splitting their attention between the outer environment and you. And so you're not taking away, there's some trainers that will train a dog to stare at them the entire time, stare at the person, and you're taking away the joy of being outside and on a walk for a dog if you do that. But at the same time, you want to be able to have a dog that can go and sniff and enjoy the air and then kind of looks back at you. And I find that a lot of people start to really enjoy the walks because you're walking more with the dog when you're doing that than just, following the dog on a leash, whether they're doing, whether they're reacting or not. At the same time, I want to train the dog to check in and look at you whenever there is something new in the environment. And again, that's a behavior, it's an alternative behavior that will eventually build into the dog sees the trigger and looks at you. So the trigger then becomes a cue to look at you instead of to bark, lunge, and growl. And so those two things together, we're changing, like I said, we're changing the trigger from being an antecedent or a cue to react with barking and lunging to looking at the person. So there's a couple of things that happen with that, is that the dog starts to take on some responsibility for looking at the environment. And it also helps in those situations where the dog starts to react and you don't know, you don't know what they're reacting to. It may be a smell, or there may be a dog around the corner, or you may not know that there's a dog around the corner. If the dog is taking some of that environmental scanning off of you, it helps you, because sometimes the dog is going to react or start to get aroused before, because they're aware of something you're not. And so teaching a dog that anytime they're coming across anything new, they look at you, you don't have to worry about what is in the environment. You just have to worry about that my dog is looking at you and you do the behavior that the dog is cueing you. And sometimes it's just giving them a treat. Sometimes it may be moving away. It depends on the dog and the situation, what actually reinforces that looking. But what we want to do is build that reorientation behavior really strongly in the home. So we want to start executing the training effectively. When we start in a non-distracted environment, we start proofing, adding distractions. I use little toys that run around. You can use other people in the house and other dogs in the house. And then you start to generalize to the backyard, the front yard, all those kinds of things until they're ready, and until they're ready to try to do it in front of a real trigger. So they have alternative behaviors that are really strong and fluent, and then you can start to work. So that's kind of the way that I've been working. So I want to talk a little bit about why I do it this way. So I played around for a few years with different approaches, like a lot of us do, and the protocols that are out there. The basic protocols. And when I used to teach reactivity classes and started doing privates, I would teach people all of them. Here you can do this, you can do this, or you can do this. And what I realized is that clients were getting really confused about what approach to use when. Um, so that became, a challenge that we were adding to the client's, cognitive load in a stressful situation is, what do I do? Do I do this protocol or that protocol or that protocol? And so I wanted to streamline it so that it's just, here's one thing that's easy to use. And many also had difficulty preventing their dogs from reacting in the real world. So those are the two things. It's like, which procedure do I use? I'm doing great in the training environment or training setups, but everything's falling apart in our regular life. And so I finally realized for myself that in my client base is that I was asking people that were novices to do pretty sophisticated reads of their dog's body language, because that's challenging. It's challenging to read your dog's body language. I'm up to that. Sorry, I'm behind I'm kind of getting, like I said, I'm figuring out how to do two things, chew gum and walk at the same time. Anyway, what I realized is that I was asking them to do too many things at one time, is, challenging, sophisticated reads of dogs' body language. That takes a lot of years and looking at a lot of dogs' body language and to be able to look at their total dog. And so that's why I always focused on what's that one thing that the dog does when something is new in the environment. Does the ear twitch? Does the nose sniff? Does the forehead, crinkle? Does the tail go up? We're just looking for one thing that's a cue. That way it's very easy because you're only looking for one thing instead of looking at the entire body, which can be kind of challenging and confusing. The dog may look relaxed in the front and really stressed in the back. So that's one thing. We were also asking them to make a lot of advanced leash handling and things like that were preventing success. And also, like I said, if I'm teaching 3, 4, or 5 different methods, and I thought I was being helpful by doing that, then they're asking them to make a decision about what to use in a very stressful situation instead of practicing, this is what you do, this is what you do. So the human learns the behavior really well. So this came really clear to me when in 2015, I had a run of clients with various limitations, the human clients. I had a client with Parkinson's who walked their dog with a walker. I had clients that had body balance issues. I had a lot of seniors. It was just like a spate of these kind of people who there's a lot of risk and potential safety risk if they make a mistake. So, accidentally letting the dog react was not an option. And it was very important to their life to continue to walk their dog. That was something that was giving them, an emotional life while they were going through these other issues. So that was a real consideration. These are people who could be seriously hurt if things got out of hand. And I realized that I wasn't doing a great job of keeping people from letting things get out of hand. So fortunately for me at the time, I was finishing up my academic work in applied behavior analysis at FIT. And so I had access to experts, the instructors, who were more than happy to help me figure out some solutions that made it easier on the humans and build their skills in a safer manner and build the skills for both the dogs and a human in a safe, really structured environment that made it so that when you first start working with the dog in a real world environment, then if the dog knows what to do, the person knows what to do, and we have a lot more successes right out the gate. And so that's pretty much why I learned. Um, so some of the things that I do to make it easier on the human and the human to learn is that if I use the Karen Overall's relaxation protocol until the human understands their dog's body language. So they're not learning what their dog looks like when they're stressed out in a stressed out environment. They're learning it in a very dull, boring, structured environment, but that will teach you what your dog starts to look like and what your dog's body language. I also work on the mechanics of treat delivery, and that's a criteria for me to move people forward in the exercises. And that's something that I found that even trainers that worked for me, when they would say, "Are we going to do XYZ with the dog first?" And it was like, "Well, in the next session, we're going to work on um, the treat delivery, the mechanical delivery for the person. And once they have that, then we can continue working with the dog." So I really worked on that so that dogs didn't become prompt dependent, so that they could make, and they were very well practiced in stressful environments in delivering treats and delivering reinforcements officially. And so that are some of the things that I focused on a little bit more. And then we're building strong alternative behaviors outside the problem environment. And so that means that we may not start working with dogs until, it just depends on the dog and how fast they learn. But it may be that we practice the reorientation and the loose leash walking for a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, until that behavior is strong and you can do it. We just very slowly add in distractions and make it slowly more and more. We're looking towards more errorless learning and working that way until we actually get to the big trigger. We're teaching the dog to respond differently to the trigger. So trigger equals look at the human walking at them. So that takes the onus off of the human again to constantly scan the environment. So while the triggers and the distractions become a cue for the dog to look at the human, that look from the dog becomes a cue for the human to do something about it. There's something in the environment, and now we have to try to do something about it. And that becomes a very much easier cue than constantly scanning the environment, constantly scanning your dog's body language. Your dog learns that something new in the environment, I'm going to look at mom, I'm going to look at dad, and then it'll be taken care of. And that has helped tremendously with situations where there may be a dog around a corner or a blind spot. There was one client that we worked on that had a really large dog that actually dragged the woman down the street. And when we first started turning this over to, we actually did the training for this dog. And then when we were transferring the skills to the people and we were out and about, the dog suddenly stopped and stared at the person. And like I said, we all looked around, we couldn't see anything. And then we took a few steps forward and we were able to see a dog up front that was on the other side of a hill. And so the dog let us know there was something coming, and that made all the difference in the world, so that the dog was able to respond, and then the person, and it also builds a confidence in people that may be a little bit anxious and nervous walking their dogs. So based on the situation, we may teach a sit and reorient, we may teach a reorient and move away, or we may just teach a reorient and you get treats. And that is all very individual and environmentally dependent. The end goal, if we can get there, is that you can just walk past another dog or another trigger or whatever the trigger is, and the dog looks at you, you reinforce the dog, and you don't even have to stop. It takes a while to get there. So let me just show you what this looks like, and then we'll get to any questions if there are any. So this is a client who lived in with a lot of property, but there are horses on the other in their next door neighbors, and it was driving the dog crazy and the people crazy. So we were working this with the dog. Back of this person. Hey bud. So I'm going to play this again because it can be kind of hard. Let me hide this. It can be kind of hard to see what's happening, Danny. Yeah. What's happening? Okay, there you go. What's happening? What's happening in this thing is that in the upper right hand corner of the video, there are two horses, and they find a branch and start playing with it. So it's not only just there's a horse over there, there's horses that are jumping and playing. Just imagine like two dogs playing with a stick. And we're going for is the dog is looking, and it's like, oh, okay, that means I look back at my person. Here's another client with her dog. This was the first time we were outside of her neighborhood, in an area where there are lots of people that were coming and going. It's a common place that people take their dogs to walk, but fortunately there's a lot of empty space where you can get all kinds of distances. So this is the first time. This dog was very reactive, and also had a lot of other anxiety issues, and she was able to work through them. So it took a while to get here, and he actually did a lot better than we imagined he was able to do. If he gets locked where he can't pay attention to you, that just means the people are too close. And good boy. And you just have to move it further away. So here's a person, and they have a dog too.
Just sitting here?
Yep, just stay here. You'll be able to tell he'll be able to stop. You'll start to see longer and longer times in between the look. Okay, so move a little. There we go. Yes. I think. Yay! That was awesome. I thought he was going to lose it there for a second. That surprised me. Okay. So, yeah, that actually surprised me with him that he did so well, because when they came around, there was multiple people and a dog, and I thought that they were going to have to move back. So if you notice, when you look at him, he's relaxed, he's sitting there. So a question I get often when I show these types of videos is, does the dog always have to sit? And this was the first time they were doing that. So I do find that if you're working and you're just getting used to it, that it helps both the dog and the human to just stop, because then you're not trying to walk and chew gum at the same time. You actually can stop, you can focus, the dog can stop, the dog can focus. But over time, what you're building towards is being able to, do passes and things like that. And we practice those as well. So that's my little thing on reactivity. I was just wondering, does anybody have any questions? No questions? Okay, then. If you do, then just slide into my DM, my PMs. Just go ahead and ask any questions. Like I said, I'm going to be doing these every other week. The next one is in 2 weeks. So I forget what date it is. It'll go up on both Facebook and on YouTube, just like this one is. And you can, and that one's going to be on separation issues. It's a pandemic special, because so many of us, I know I'm dealing with it with one of my dogs, where they've gotten so used to me being home that there are some issues when I leave. So we're going to work a little bit. I'm going to talk a bit on separation issues there. Okay, so if nobody else has any questions, I am just going to go ahead and end the broadcast. It should post the video of it for anyone that you want to go back and look at it or anything like that. And thank you for coming. I appreciate there's like 11 people here. That's great. For a first live stream, that's really great. And I will see you guys on Facebook and also in 2 weeks when I do another live stream. Okay, thanks. Bye.